The message arrived on a crackling German radio in the spring of 1944. 3 words in coded French. Bluebird is moving. In the Gestapo regional office in Vichy, a senior commander set down his coffee. He had seen many resistance code names come across his desk. Most were broken within weeks. Most were dead within months. This one was different. Bluebird had first appeared in intercepted signals in May 1944. Then came the reports. A Gestapo outpost raided in the Auvergne. A German convoy ambushed on a mountain road at night. An armory stripped bare before dawn. The Gestapo told themselves it was a British-run network, a large, organized unit. No single agent could move that fast, cover that ground, hit that hard. But the intelligence files told a different story. Bluebird was one person. She had parachuted into France from a British aircraft in the dead of night. She had organized thousands of armed fighters from a forest camp. She had ridden 500 kilometers alone through German checkpoints. She had killed a trained SS soldier with nothing but her hands, and not one German who had seen her face lived to describe it. She was real. She was alone. She was already inside their lines, and she was nowhere near finished. Her name was Nancy Grace Augusta Wake. She was born on 30 August 1912 in Roseneath, in Wellington, New Zealand. She was the youngest of 6 children. Her father left for New Zealand when she was still small. Her mother raised all 6 children alone in the suburbs of North Sydney, Australia. Wake grew up restless, fierce, and impossible to contain. At the age of 16, she ran away from home. She trained briefly as a nurse. She saved what little money she could. With £200 inherited from an aunt, she sailed to New York. Then she went to London. She taught herself to write. She became a journalist and found work with Hearst newspapers in Paris. By the early 1930s, she was reporting across Europe, Vienna, Berlin, Rome. In Vienna, she witnessed something that would define the rest of her life. She stood on a street in the Austrian capital and watched Nazi thugs move freely. They beat Jewish men and women without warning and without mercy. She watched a brown shirt whip an elderly Jewish man with systematic cruelty. She did not look away. She stood there. She absorbed every detail. She had no power to stop it that day. She made herself a promise that she would find a way. Nancy Wake was not yet at war, but she already knew who the enemy was. In 1937, Wake met Henry Edmond Fiacre, a wealthy French industrialist from Marseille. She was sharp, beautiful, and utterly fearless. He was charmed immediately. They married on 30 November 1939, 6 weeks after Britain declared war on Germany. France fell to Nazi Germany in June 1940. Wake had no intention of leaving. She began driving ambulances for wounded French soldiers during the chaos of the defeat. She watched the German army march into city after city with arrogant ease. She watched civilians bombed on roads while they fled south with everything they owned. Then Captain Ian Garrow approached her about something more useful than driving ambulances. She joined his escape network immediately. The operation later became known as the Pat O'Leary Line. Its mission was simple and extraordinarily dangerous. It smuggled Allied airmen, Jewish refugees, and targeted French civilians out of occupied France. Wake became one of its most effective couriers. She moved through German-controlled territory wearing civilian clothes and a bright, disarming smile. She flirted with German officers at checkpoints and railway stations. She laughed when they tried to intimidate her and asked for their lighter. She forged documents. She memorized routes. She improvised when plans collapsed. The Gestapo noticed her. They tapped her phone. They opened her mail. They could never quite catch her. She always slipped away. They gave her a nickname. They called her the White Mouse. By 1943, the price on her head was 5 million francs. 5 million francs. It was the largest bounty in France. It was the price the Gestapo put on someone they feared more than respected. In early 1943, the entire Pat O'Leary network was betrayed and compromised. Wake was arrested in Toulouse, swept up with an entire train of passengers. She was held for 4 days by German authorities. Albert Guyres, the network's leader, talked his way into the interrogation room. He told the Germans that Wake was his mistress and nothing more. They believed him. They released her. She crossed the Pyrenees Mountains on foot into neutral Spain. It was a brutal mountain crossing in winter conditions. She was not the first person she had guided through those passes, but it was the first time she was running alone. From Spain, she made her way to Britain, and when she arrived in London, she did not stop moving for a single day. She walked into Charles de Gaulle's Free French organization and asked to go back. They turned her away. They did not want a woman. She walked to the British Special Operations Executive and made the same request. They said yes without hesitation. SOE put Wake through training in the Scottish Highlands and in England. She learned parachute jumping, weapons handling, sabotage, radio operation, and hand-to-hand combat. Her training reports used words rarely found in official military documents. She was described as a very good and fast shot with excellent fieldcraft. She was noted to put the men to shame by her cheerful spirit. SOE officer Vera Atkins called her a real Australian bombshell, tremendous vitality. She was assigned the codename Hailing. She was placed on a 3-person team called Freelance. The team leader was Major John Hind Farmer, codenamed Hubert. The radio operator was Denny's Rake, a quietly brilliant and deeply courageous man. Their mission was to organize, arm, and coordinate the Maquis resistance groups in the Auvergne. D-Day was approaching. London needed the French interior ready to erupt. The night of 29 April 1944 was moonless and cold over central France. Wake crouched in the belly of a Liberator bomber, grinding through enemy airspace. She was dressed for what came next: overalls, revolvers, a bulky camel hair coat. Beneath the overalls, she wore civilian clothes, including high heels and silk stockings. She carried a handbag stuffed with cash, coded documents, and D-Day target lists. Below the aircraft, bonfires burned in the darkness. She did not know who had lit them. She leaped anyway. Her parachute opened cleanly. She floated down through absolute silence. Then the canopy caught in the upper branches of a tree. She hung there, several feet above the ground, completely unable to free herself. Footsteps moved toward her through the dark. A man stepped from the tree line and looked up. His name was Henry Tardivat, one of the most formidable Maquis commanders in the Auvergne. He looked at the woman suspended above him and smiled. "I hope all the trees in France bear such beautiful fruit this year," he said. Wake looked down at him in the dark. "Cut out that bullshit and get me out of this tree." Tardivat laughed. He had his answer. He had his Bluebird. Within days, the fighters in his network had named her. She had fallen from the sky at night. She moved like something born to the air. She was fast, precise, and absolutely impossible to pin down. They called her Bluebird. The Gestapo intercepted the code name within weeks through radio signals intelligence. They cross-referenced it with every file on active British agents in France. The match came back immediately. Bluebird was the White Mouse. The woman they had been hunting since 1942 was back in their territory, and she was now in command of thousands of armed men. Wake's official role was liaison between SOE London and the Maquis of the Auvergne. In practice, she ran operations from first light to after midnight. She located the landing zones where British aircraft dropped weapons, money, and supplies. She collected the crates in darkness and distributed them to dozens of separate resistance units. She paid individual Maquis fighters from her own funds. She coordinated with Resistance Commander Emile Couloudin, codenamed Gaspard, who ran the central network. Couloudin was difficult and territorial. Wake dealt with him by being more stubborn than he was. By May 1944, Culloden had declared a general mobilization of resistance fighters in the Auvergne. Nearly 7,000 armed men assembled in 3 groups across the region's hills and forests. It was the largest concentration of French resistance fighters anywhere in occupied France. Wake was at the operational center of all of it. The men tested her constantly. They challenged her over rations, over routes, over tactics. A local Maquis commander challenged her to a drinking contest to test her resolve. They sat in a forest hideout and downed glass after glass of local spirits. Wake drank him under the table without apology. Tardivat watched and later summed up what the men were slowly learning. "She is the most feminine woman I know," he said, "until the fighting starts. Then she is like 5 men." They were not wrong, because when the Germans finally came, Wake did not retreat indoors. She was already in the field. On 2 June 1944, German forces launched a probing assault on Culloden's base at Montmauchet. It was a test. It was designed to measure resistance strength. On 10 June, the Germans returned with a far larger force. On 20 June, they encircled Culloden's positions from multiple directions simultaneously. The Maquis took heavy casualties and were forced to abandon their positions. Wake and the SOE freelance team joined the fighting withdrawal. For 3 days, they retreated westward across 150 kilometers of enemy-occupied terrain. They reached the village of Saint-Santin exhausted and dangerously exposed. Then they discovered what the retreat had cost them. Denis Rake, the radio operator, had been forced to abandon his radio and codes. Without radio contact, SOE London had no way to receive their situation report. The invasion of Normandy had taken place on 6 June while they were under assault. The Germans were racing to crush every resistance unit before the Allied advance reached them. Wake needed to reach London. She had to do it immediately. The nearest functioning SOE radio was near Châteauroux. Châteauroux was 500 kilometers away. She borrowed a bicycle from a farmer. She rode. She rode through German checkpoints without papers that would survive close inspection. She smiled at soldiers. She waved at sentries. She pedaled through the Auvergne night and day. She found the radio near Châteauroux, delivered her full situation report to London, and turned around. She rode 500 kilometers back to Saint-Santin. The entire journey took 72 hours. When she arrived, she wept briefly with exhaustion and then went back to work. The Gestapo had named her their most wanted agent in all of France. She had just cycled straight through the middle of their territory to send a telegram. The night Wake would later describe most quietly came during a raid on a German armory. The operation was moving according to plan. Maquis fighters were positioned around the target. The perimeter was held. Wake moved along the edge of the compound in darkness, coordinating the units. Then she heard footsteps she was not expecting. They were slow, deliberate, disciplined, an SS sentry following his patrol route. He had not yet seen the raiders, but his route would bring him into view of them. If he raised the alarm, the entire operation was finished. Wake made her decision in under 2 seconds. She could not use a firearm. The sound would bring every guard in the compound. But SOE had trained her for exactly this. She had spent weeks in Scotland practicing the killing blow, a judo chop with the flat of the hand. She had never used it on a living person. She moved through the darkness without a sound. The blow was precise. The sentry dropped without making a noise. She stepped back. The raid continued. The team got out clean. Years later, a television interviewer asked Wake what happened to the German sentry who found her. She drew her finger slowly across her throat, then she spoke. "They taught this judo chop stuff with the flat of the hand at SOE, but this was the only time I ever used it whack, and it killed him all right. I was really surprised." Surprised. An SS soldier trained for war, dead on the ground, and she was surprised. That was the woman the Germans were looking for. That was Bluebird. The German military spent months and enormous resources trying to locate her. They ran intelligence agents through the Auvergne region systematically. They monitored every radio frequency used by the Maquis. They offered enormous sums to informers and collaborators. They arrested, interrogated, and sometimes tortured anyone with suspected Maquis connections. They never found her. Not once did they come close. The reason was not luck, it was method. Nancy Wake did not behave like a spy who knew she was being hunted. She behaved like a person who simply belonged wherever she was standing. She spoke French with the accent of Marseille, fluent, natural, completely undetectable. She dressed like a French provincial businesswoman. She carried herself with total authority. At German checkpoints, she never slowed her pace or dropped her gaze. She smiled. She made small jokes. She flirted when it was useful. She had learned this technique years before, moving Allied airmen across Vichy, France. She never used the same safe house twice in quick succession. She never established patterns. She never stayed still long enough to be fixed. She also had something the Gestapo's training manuals never accounted for. She was simply braver than almost anyone they had ever hunted. Fear is the thing that makes agents break their own routines. Fear makes them freeze at checkpoints. Fear makes them avoid eye contact. Wake refused to give fear the command. She kept moving. She kept smiling. She kept hitting. The Germans hunted Bluebird through the summer of 1944. Bluebird hit them, and moved, and hit them again. Nancy Wake survived the war. The German army in France did not. On 15 August 1944, American forces landed on the southern coast of France. The German military began its retreat northward. Wake and the Auvergne Maquis harried them every step of the way. During the victory celebrations that followed in the city of Vichy, Wake received the news. Her husband, Henry Fiacca, was dead. The Gestapo had arrested him after she escaped to Spain in 1943. They tortured him for the location of his wife. He had not said a single word. He was executed by the Gestapo in 1943, alone and without her ever knowing. Wake had run across Pyrenees passes, parachuted into dark forests, and ridden through checkpoints. She had survived everything the most powerful military force in European history could throw at her. And the thing that broke her, the only thing, was that her husband had died because of her. She had not been there to protect him, and she had not known. She wept in Vichy. And then she squared her shoulders and returned to the work. The United Kingdom awarded Wake the George Medal on 17 July 1945. The citation read simply, "For brave conduct in hazardous circumstances." The United States awarded her the Medal of Freedom in 1947. France gave her the Médaille de la Résistance and the Croix de Guerre 3 times over. She was appointed an officer of the Légion d'honneur in 1988. Her friend Henry Tardivat, the man who found her hanging in a tree, lost his leg in the liberation. He never stopped calling her the greatest fighter he had ever served alongside. Wake published her autobiography, The White Mouse, in 1985. She died on 7 August 2011 at Kingston Hospital in London. She was 98 years old. At her request, her ashes were scattered near the village of Verneix, close to Montluçon. Montluçon was the city where Bluebird had once walked into the Gestapo's headquarters and destroyed it. It was the right place to come to rest. The Gestapo had a file on her. They had a bounty. They had a nickname. They had 5 million reasons to find her. They never did. The Bluebird moved too fast, flew too low, and hit too hard. And Germany learned, too late, that some things that look like birds are not fragile at all.